And with that, we are live again. It's Not Playing Politics with Alexander Keaton and my Rio, Nick Bradshaw. How you doing today, Nick?
Good. It's good to hear from you again, my friend, and looking forward to today's conversation.
No, so am I. This is sort of the second half of our conversation about the media in general. But before we get started, it is Memorial Day weekend, and there's sort of that conflict, right? Because everyone wishes you a happy Memorial Day, but it's like it doesn't seem to be the appropriate greeting or wish for this particular weekend. I've heard the term have an honorable weekend and Memorial Day weekend. I don't even know if that necessarily properly fits, but it's definitely better than happy. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think for the working use of it, just to have people recognize it, I think is a good step forward, right? But so if someone says Happy Memorial Day, I certainly don't try to say, actually, I need to correct you. I think it's important that we at least keep that acknowledgement alive in our society. But you're right, to the understanding of what it is is in memoriam. It is a day of recognizing, honoring, and the awareness of the mourning of military personnel who have given the ultimate sacrifice. But it is something that I think, not that I would ever speak for those who have sacrificed for us, but the fact that people can spend time with their families and go out and do something and maybe turn it into something enjoyable and make it about enjoying the freedoms and the joys of being in this beautiful country. I think that it is important to do that. And I think that's probably why that sacrifice was made, so that they could have that opportunity. So when I have friends that are going out and doing stuff this weekend, and, especially in the time that we're occupying, right. This is a bizarre time. So for people to even get out and literally dip their toes into the water and, and see if they're going to get out there and do something.
Except in New York.
And it says a lot. It certainly brings an awareness to it. Sure. Yeah.
No, absolutely. And one of those freedoms that we're talking about, I think it is absolutely the freedom of speech, right? And the media relies on that freedom of speech. And yet, as we've been discussing, and sort of where we ended off last time, is a lot of things I've noticed over the last couple of weeks, maybe even the last couple of months for me, have really gone back to Eisenhower's speech. Actually, several things that Eisenhower said. The whole military-industrial complex, right? That's sort of where we ended off last time, and it's sort of like who's really sort of paying for these things. But I kind of want to go back and see what as a reinforcement. The freedom of speech was to promote good information, right? It was to promote the exchange of ideas so that we as a society could gain better understandings of things, create a more perfect society, right? The belief that if we could really talk to one another, we'd iron out a lot of these problems.
Yeah, I think, again, what I don't ever want to look like, is none of us want to be, that guy. You don't want to be the know-it-all that's, actually, the thing about it is, I think that there is this lacking understanding, and it's not because any of us are smarter or care more about it. I don't think it has anything to do with that. I think it has to do with the fact that a lot of the subject matter that we talk about on this show is something that we're trying to bring, because it's probably conversations we've had with friends at one time or another. And that's what I love about this show, is that for my friends out there, and a quick shout out to all of you, family, this is an opportunity for us to address a lot of these topics that many of us have had in conversation. But we have the abilities, you and I, for preparing for this show or talking about this show, to access a lot of information and talk about it in such a way that we, certainly sound like we could fake it to make it, right? So I bring that up to say, when we talk about something like the media, it's so ripe to just be able to jump into a bunch of contemporary buzzwords and, CNN, Breitbart and MSNBC and Fox News, and just get into talking points. Well, I don't think anyone's going to listen to our podcast that already has to go through that every day.
Exactly.
Because the average person out there, which I think is where I think you and I desperately want to be, is amongst our friends, family, and loved ones, is not sitting around going, do you think the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment has been wrong? I think it's more like, hey, do you want to get a cheeseburger and maybe we'll go see Star Wars? I mean, that's where you are. And I think that if there's anything, the document of the Constitution is something that I think is not only brilliant and beautiful, but I think that if you can really dive into it, you can see how alive it is. I brought that up because and I have pulled up here to address it specifically, that the First Amendment states clearly, Congress, the first word of it by itself tells you where they're looking at these laws, right? And as we've, heard so many times before, that the government was set up in such a way that the executive would not trump everyone else because that was just a king and a monarchy that they had come from. Right. So if we look at something in a word that I know you love, my friend, which is in context, we were a country coming from a monarchy that was getting away from that, and it was setting up a new form of government. So by simply stating Congress and not the king, the president, the ruler, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. Well, let's stop it right there for a minute. You always hear about the Establishment Clause all the time. And any time religion is mentioned in any context, we can dive in here a little bit. It's always, separation of church and state. If I have a problem with that, it's not that people want to not have government and religion, or religion overseeing government, or whatever. It's the manner with which I think it's being completely mislabeled. Right. I do not interpret the Establishment Clause, or that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, to say the United States shall never be a theocracy. It shall never be Iran. It shall never be placed into a situation where the religious power, A, tells all the people what religion they have to be, and B, controls the instruments of government. Now, I don't want to get too deep down that rabbit hole because we're talking about the whole thing. Second part of the phrase, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, like we just talked about. The government won't control the regulation of your religion. Or abridging the freedom of speech. Now, we have certain guidelines to that, and there are many of my friends out there right now that I think I can think of in my mind that are saying, well, that doesn't mean you can say anything to anybody, anywhere, all the time. And that's right. There are certain guidelines we've come up with that we recognize, be it libel or threats or threats of harm or things like that,
and even fraud, right? If you
slander, fraud, it's openly lying. Now, I want to make sure that we have constitutional lawyers out there holding us accountable, and that we are not by any means providing legal law guidelines. I'm simply saying we have acknowledged there are ways that the freedom of speech is recognized, so that we're not just here saying willy-nilly, just do anything you want anytime, day or night. No, there's an understanding. But to get to the level that you would have to push to violate the freedom of speech, I mean, you would probably instinctually know that you are well beyond the boundaries. Now, here's the part we're talking about today. Or violating the freedom of speech or of the press. Remember, contextually, my friend, your word, royalties to you, that of the press, you dealt with a lot of publishers in this time. You dealt with a lot of people whose information was being passed, whether it was, from a small printing shop in New England to something going on in Virginia. And,
right.
And first off, you had to look at things like access, or some would refer to as political economy. We're not going to get into that right now. We're going to talk about access. Today, it's the internet. 1785, and guess what? It could have been those who could read. So we need
the printing press, right? It was, and that's the, like you said, there were lots of little printing presses everywhere. In many ways, let's actually,
just like websites.
It's like websites today. Exactly. We are sort of in a very similar situation. Okay, just a little, again, historical context here. There is a gross misunderstanding about literacy throughout history. We tend to look at, it's like, well, most people couldn't read. Even going back to the Middle Ages, most historians say that there was at least one, if not more, people in every household who could read. Even here in the United States, reading was fairly common, at least in the cities and at least in the towns, right? There were people who could read. It was like everyone was illiterate. And so because of that, because reading was so favored, there were a lot of printing presses, and they printed newspapers all the time, and people wanted that exchange of information. Well, what that meant was you had editorialists and pamphleteers just putting a ton of material out, all of it at the same, without this sort of overarching centralized control like you got oftentimes in England, although even though that had even broken down a little bit, because the monarchy just couldn't control everything. And that sort of led to a lot of these exchanges of ideas that led to the American Revolution. Sorry, continue.
Yeah, no, not at all. I appreciate the contribution. I think, again, moving from where we were just talking about that, again, a question to be asked was, just as many people who had access to the press and printable material in the ages of the late 18th century, early 19th century, as opposed to how many people have access to the internet today. People that are into the media and into tracking news tend to be really into the media and really tracking news. Yeah. I wonder if it's that ratio of the same thing. The population of the United States obviously was fractional compared to what it is today. But I think so was the representation of people really getting on top of reading some of these pamphlets and staying there potentially. So again, I very rarely believe that whatever's happening to society is the first time it's ever happened or the last time that it will happen. Moving forward with the First Amendment of the press, or the right of the people to peaceably to assemble. And again, I mean, that's common sense. We know that. Many would use that as their guidelines for the ability to protest, right? And the next one they would say, and to petition the government for redress of grievances. Here's the thing I want to get to. When we read the words, when we're not guessing or even worse, making things up, when we read the words, I think it is fundamentally important that we recognize within both context and within both application in a contemporary environment that just using the word media, which is plural for medium, simply means the outlets and platforms which are, in this case, providing information with regard to the press. This brings us to what I think is our topic today, which is, what driving forces are there in the media that are pushing narratives? How are they doing it? Why are they doing it? And what is holding them accountable? Short answer, I think how they're doing it is through a conglomerate, is through a big powered, highly funded corporate model on one side. That's where you get your major channels, your CNNs, your Fox Newses, big things like that, right? NBC, I believe, I check me on this internet, but I believe that NBC was owned by GE. You had the massive in the late 90s, early 2000s. You had the massive AOL Time Warner, which eventually broke apart, I believe, shortly after. But what I'm getting at is, again, when the same company that provides you with light bulbs is providing you with a television, do you think that potentially contracts and international treaties and international policy and trade organizations and whatnot play a role in the potential messaging of what that is? To say that the age of bias is gone, to say that the age of people who are true newsmen and women, and I'm talking about, reporting the news like the Astros played the Yankees and won 3-4, right? Instead, now, because we've commercialized it and we've turned it into infotainment, now it's everybody's the greatest of all time. There's been more greatest of all times in the last 3 years than I think there ever has been in the history of sports. And
I'll give that to you.
I think that's presented because, again, it comes to the next topic we're looking at, and that is, how do they do it? And the question next was, why do they do it? And they do it to sell seats, right? You're trying to fill seats in the stadium. William Randolph Hearst said, you provide the pictures, I'll provide the war. Again, the channel with which you use it on some level can be a big corporate organization, or what we're starting to see is a return to that 18th century model of those local small printing presses. So you get people, I would say Ben Shapiro is probably more well-known than many, but I'm using his company, the Daily Wire, as an example to show what a smaller, openly conservative site that identifies as an openly conservative site says. You've got Matt Drudge at the Drudge Report. Again, these are guys that are crossing over. They're not at the Fox News level. They're not at the CNN, MSNBC hits level. Potentially, again, you could track that through online sources. But they're not some kid with a podcast that's got 9 people watching And we
Right.
would like to say thank you to our 9 viewers. But what I'm saying is that we are somehow circling back to the barn on this. And I kind of want to toss back to you. You're our history guy. You're our context guy here. Do you see that happening? And what kind of implications do you think that's going to breed?
In fact, I do. So here's, because there's a lot there, right? For me, what I'm seeing is a return to decentralization, as power, both in the media and politically, have been ever increasingly centralized for the government in Washington, and then for the media, for what we call the media or the press, has been centralized amongst like a very small handful of larger corporate owners like Disney, like GE. Um, it's as that's all sort of congealed. We've also reached that point where a lot of people don't like that, and they're like, "I'm going to speak out and do a lot of these small things." And so what we're seeing is a lot of decentralization. And really, I think this whole COVID-19 event has helped really promote that in ways that we're only going to be able to look back and see for like a few years from now and be like, man, that genuinely changed a lot of things, including how we're going to worship. I mean, it's a lot of things, and we can talk about that more in the future. But yes, what we're seeing is a decentralization, and this is what happens, though, right? Power becomes collected. Once power is collected, it becomes abusive, it becomes domineering, and those who reap the benefit of that power centralization abuse it, they flaunt it, and the disparity become between those in charge, those who are of that class, and those who are not of that class. That disparity becomes untenable, and there's some form of revolt. Now, this goes back to why the context, again, context matters for a lot of things, right? And in particularly, we can see how our media not just lacks context, but deliberately removes context in order to hide, in order to both hide what's really happening, but then also to try and sell a narrative that keeps them in power. Again, we don't want to be, have this be like, well, here's what Fox said, and here's what CNN said. Let's, make them battle it out like they're, toys, right? Again, the logo of our show is 2 chess pieces. That's the point. Is that all of this conflict between Fox and what we call the old school or mainstream media is entirely artificial. It's that conflict is there in order to give us the illusion that there's a fight. I don't argue with anyone about anything on Facebook because I see it as being an equivalent to milking a bull. It's a lot of work, and you're not going to get anything out of it that you want.
Yeah, well, it's funny you say it that way. I have a dear friend who once said to me, he's a pretty politically charged guy. He's well read and he's aware. We have differing views on things, but he once said it very well. He goes, "I have Twitter for one purpose," and I said, "Well, what's that?" And he said, "It's where I get to go to scream into the void." And I think that that's what it is. The internet is a lot of things to a lot of people. We need to be careful that speaking about media and just blow things out of proportion. But the internet is a great many things. It's a hub of information. It's a global telecommunication device. It's a device used for information gathering and research. That's fine. That's fine. So there's a myriad of wonderful things. The internet is also a great place for angry people to go and be really angry. And when you create an environment and you create a show, and you and I are starting to see this in responses that we've received, you feel good with the attaboys, but let's be honest, it's the responses you get sometimes where people will take things to a channel that you just don't even understand. You can't comprehend. That's something that's interesting. So the internet, that's why I think, and this kind of transitions us into our topic of what kind of accountability is there. We had a conversation before the show as we were prepping for our audience out there. One thing that we were discussing was, it was the wise Denzel Washington who the show does not know and have any type of official endorsement of, but we'll say to keep it lighthearted. In a online video that any of you guys can YouTube in probably the next, before I finish this sentence, you can find an interview where Denzel Washington is walking the red carpet somewhere, and he's called over by the media, and he's talking to a reporter, and he stops them and he says, you know, you guys have the authority here to make some real impact. You have the responsibility to be right. But it seems like what drives this, and I'm paraphrasing, is the desire to want to be first. And that's why I think, excuse me, that's why I think you're seeing so many stories with, I'm going to use a super highly charged buzz phrase, that are claimed to be fake news. And to me, as we've said on this show many times, fake news is not that you missed a fact. Hey, Thursday, it wasn't 78, it was 74. Oh, okay, we're going to make a correction. Weather changes. That's what it does. That's understandable. That's measurable. Fake news to me is the building of an op-ed narrative from a series of facts to drive a bigger storyline when that's not there.
Let me take that one step further.
It's all about framing. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's that's how I see it.
No. And I think you're well. There's two key points here. Firstly, that you don't know Denzel Washington. I find that very fascinating because, I mean, we were just chatting over beers the other day. I need to introduce you.
Exactly.
But
look, I'm getting a text message. It's somebody named Denzel Washington. Never mind. Yeah. I do know.
Yeah, exactly. No. But no, you're absolutely right. It's not that people get things wrong, right? There are facts that can be in flux. They aren't as confirmed. You know, there's always that. Like, no matter what happens, I tell someone, you know, they're like, "Hey, did you hear about this?" I'm like, "Is it?" I'm like, "This is the first 24 hours of the story. Everything you're going to hear about it is wrong. Period. In the story. I don't care what it is. The first 24 hours is always wrong. Now, 48 hours from then, slightly more reliable. A week from then, that's when you kind of have all your ducks in a row. But sometimes it takes up to 2 weeks. The problem is, like you said, we live in an age of immediacy. We have to have everything right then, right there. And it's that move. And so it's not just that they're getting things wrong. They're deliberately looking for a narrative. Like you said, fake news is not about just creating things out of whole cloth per se, but presenting only that information which appeals to a narrative that they want to get away with, or that they want to promote. And they know that they can get away with it because for the bulk of the last really 70 years, right, what we consider the mainstream media has been the only voice. And it's only now that we have things like the Daily Wire, the Epic News, smaller channels like this are starting to emerge to question these things and say, hold up, what's really happening here? And this is the one thing I do like about Facebook, right? There are people who are being responsible and saying, hey, here is some other news that you haven't seen. Now, of course, Facebook is going to usually try and take that stuff down. But there's the promotion of a broader conversation with more information. I was talking to my father-in-law last night. And man, I'm not kidding when I say this. He has 1 PhD and 5 masters. He always jokes and says the last 2 weren't his fault.
Yeah, I mean, where does he win? Like a free steak knife set? I mean, how far?
Yeah. It's one of those things where because he's
I went to all of the colleges.
Yeah, he's like, yeah, it's all of the above.
Where did you go to school?
All of them. Yeah.
That guy's got more degrees. That guy's got more degrees than a thermometer.
Exactly. Well, and so that's one of the things we were talking about last night, right? It's sort of we were talking about ways of knowing, right? And it's sort of this over depends on what we call scientific knowledge. The problem is it isn't actually scientific knowledge that we're clinging to, right? It's ways of knowing. Science is about a conversation. It's about putting out the information and letting it be testable. Nothing is supposed to be sacred in science. There is no such thing as settled science. There are only models that accurately or less accurately describe what is observed. That's it. That's all science can tell you. Science cannot actually tell you anything. It is a tool by which we learn things and we create models. And here's the thing: every model that we started the previous century on, gone. They've all been proven inaccurate in one way or another. As we have grown in our ability to observe reality, do certain tests, we can upgrade all of these models and we change them often. The thing is, that's how it's supposed to work. Science is supposed to be an open conversation. Settled science is not science. Nothing is ever settled. But what we have, right, is both in academia and then also in just to bring this back to the press, what we have is narratives that are unquestioned. There is no let's give you the information within context so we can understand what's happening here and best diagnose the problem. I don't want to get too far off into the whole COVID-19, but let's take a look at some things. We at the beginning took actions and made recommendations, but not we personally, but as a nation, and every country made recommendations and reactions based off of information that now that we're 3 months into this, 4 and 5 months really into this thing, we're like, okay, all of that was wrong. It was almost entirely wrong. But we had to know that we had to look at it. It's like, that's the problem. We couldn't properly diagnose something that we didn't understand. In the same way, our societal issues, whether they be racial or economic or environmental, I don't care what the problems are. If we don't have accurate information that's placed into context, we will never be able to properly diagnose a situation. And oftentimes these narratives are deliberately spun to, I would argue, prevent a proper diagnosis and rather to create a false diagnosis, a false adversary that prevents us from actually really resolving the genuine plight of real human beings.
Yeah, I mean that a lot to consider there. I think we fixed the media. Good talk.
Good talk. All right, guys, let's be back next time when we talk about surfing.
Exactly. No, I think that we come down to the question here to say this, which is our next topic. Excuse me. A level of accountability. The concept of accountability is one of the slipperiest slopes that there are. Whether you look at the election right now with conversations regarding, vote by mail, the concepts of who holds speakers accountable. Again, on this show, we pride ourselves in not trying to produce a partisan perspective, but factually speaking, we will also address the news as it presents itself. This week, specifically yesterday, Vice President Joe Biden had found himself in a little bit of a sticky situation based off some comments that he had made. And within the window of about 18 hours, you have seen not only responses across the country, you've seen major organizations, and I'm talking about storied history, recognized, defined organizations, not to say that the day-to-day opinions of voters, which is what matters really. At the end of the day, when you're in the curtain and you pull that lever, that's the determining factor. But when the NAACP comes out and even has to, reinforce their position and say, that there has not been an endorsement, there are some things going on there that are interesting. And I'm not speaking just because of the NAACP with regard to Vice President Biden's comment. I'm saying the manner with which we live in a world that within 18 hours, it went from somebody making a comment that you had one of the largest socially minded organizations dealing with racial perspectives, identities, equalities in this country, headlining and bannering homepages of major outlets. That's interesting. Now, let's take this back to the concept of accountability and fake news, or however you want to use that word. Do you think that story is going to be covered on all websites? Probably not. Are others going to drill down into it really deeply and say, you see what this guy, you see what I'm talking about? And that to me is what the narrative is. Here's my thought. Let me make it smaller rather than bigger. Here's my thought. The minute you monetize news, objectivism is gone. The minute the number of clicks and likes, retweets, and shares drives the incentive to produce product, objectivism is gone. Had a dear friend that used to love to use this phrase to prove the point. And he would always tease back to the news model when we had this not that long ago. In fact, a few of us on this channel were still in college when this was the case. What he used to say was, hi, I'm Frank Johnson with Channel 6 News. Can your tap water kill you? Tune in at 5, And it was that perspective of, oh my gosh, can my tap water kill me? Well, we just now have an internet now that you can look at it. And the term designed for it is clickbait. We understand it. We know that it's there. But it's hard to get around, isn't it? You see that story, and all it has to do is tickle on that one part of curiosity in your brain. Mickey Mouse found out to be a terrorist. Oh my gosh, is Mickey Mouse a terrorist? That to me, when you monetize news, and I'm not talking about the days of CBS and Bill Paley and people bringing on, that you had to have this purity to news hours and Edward R. Murrow and people. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that there are a great number of people in both of our lives who use Facebook as their news source.
Right.
Who use Twitter as their news source. Now, I'm going to use another super highly charged buzzword. When you create and sustain and utilize an echo chamber like that, which, by the way, before we did it online, we just did it in the real world. We went to people that we shared a lot of opinions with, and we would say things and they would say, yeah. And then you knew that you were at home, right? What I'm getting at is that when we've done it digitally, we've now created places for people to go. Your Twitters, your Facebooks, wherever. I have a dear friend of mine who's hopefully listening right now from the other side of the world, and we want to send him a special Memorial Day greeting. He and I had a conversation that got fairly heated, and most of our conversations do, and that's what I love about our conversations. But he mentioned in my comment that I really enjoy reading the comment sections of stories, because those are people that are completely unfiltered, they're not gaining any political or financial gain, so their opinion is really viscerally raw. His defense was, well, that's where you're getting the lowest common denominator. That's where you're getting, and it was a valid point, that's where you're getting the people that want to be angry on the internet to go be angry. And it's true. You have to filter through a lot of it. There are a lot of really highly charged and sometimes actually flat out racist or sexist comments. And I don't mean in the way that it's been politicized. I'm talking about actual racist and sexist comments.
Right. These aren't people who are racist or sexist because they disagree with a particular political position. They genuinely hate people. And
yeah, you're different from me, therefore you're bad. And I mean, that is a dangerous place. Now, I'm going to step on a landmine here, and I'm going to take the show down this direction. I'm not going to say this with partisanship or a political perspective. I'm saying it with a personal perspective. And that is to say this. I don't think Joe Biden is a racist. I think Joe Biden is a terrible, terrible public speaker. And I think that the more he tries to, in the infamous phrase used during the Bush administration, in his horrible attempt to euthanize his campaign, he tries to use these phrases. I believe it was years ago when Romney was the Republican nominee, and he tried to speak to an audience of minorities once, and he said, well, he's going to put y'all back in chains. Okay, I mean, that's a highly charged comment to make to a group of people who have a racial challenge with the dark stain of slavery upon us to recognize that you might want to think of the sensitivity and the accuracy of what you're saying. Again, I think Joe Biden is a tragic public speaker. I don't think that he is a racist. I can tell you this for my friends out there that work in public affairs and my friends out there that work in the media. They're all like cringing in a corner if they were working that campaign, and they're face palming and literally, they're the CJ Craig from my West Wing fans out there that are just going, he just said what? Oh, right. Do I think Joe Biden did that? Absolutely not. I really don't. And what substantial impact is it going to have to the electorate? I don't know. I think you win people over with good policies and strong ideas, not with gaffes. I believe that President Trump has made a series of gaffes. Do I think it's because of some highly charged racial perspective or some highly charged need to be new here's the other point that I'd make. It's a constant need in our age of immediacy to be in the news cycle all the time, every day.
Let me point
to it drives politicians.
Oh, exactly. No, you are absolutely right.
All day, every day. That's how you do
it. In fact,
saying hey, you don't know how to vote for me, and then you ain't black. I mean, horribly insensitive, horribly, and not even. You know what? Let me take it a step farther, because I believe that people are a lot more resilient than a lot of us give them credit for. This is what I think a lot of people heard. Boy, that was something stupid to say. And I think that before it came down to this, oh my gosh, he's got a hood in his trunk and he's going to be lighting a cross in someone's yard. I don't believe that. I just don't think that Biden knows how to communicate in an engaged way with an audience that you could have had a much stronger conversation. I don't know that Joe Biden even knew who Charlemagne the God was before that interview.
Oh, I guarantee you he didn't. But
I won't go so far as saying I guarantee it because I don't know. But what I will say is that I think before you open up with, I have so many black friends. Can I tell you how many black friends I have? I think what you just need to do is be who you are and let people see your heart. And believe me, people will know if you're a racist. People will know if you're a sexist. People will see that in your heart and they'll make their determination. Well, I can think of the most open-minded people I've ever known in my life. And they've said things before that I'm like, what? But you think about it for more than 2 seconds and go, oh, okay, I see what they're saying.
So I don't want to get too far into Joe Biden too much. I think you touched on something actually that's a little bit more, that's really crucial to our current conversation. But I will say this. I actually, and this is going to be a later show, I think he is a racist. But here's the thing. I don't think he's the kind of racist that, again, this goes back to the media, right? The media presents racism as one thing and only one thing. And I think that's a huge problem, because I would argue that he absolutely is a racist. But let's table that particular aspect here for just a second. I want to go back to what you talked about, the need to be in the media all the time, or be in the news all the time. There was a book.
Control the news cycle. Yeah. Be present and dominating the news cycle at all times. Yeah, definitely. Right. Specifically within politics.
Yeah. There was a book written by Neil Postman called Amusing Ourselves to Death. And there's a lot of aspects to the book that are really interesting. But for our conversation, one of the points that you had brought out was the idea of infotainment. He's basically, it is his argument that this constant stream of nonstop information, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, then, like you said, living this age of immediacy is actually making us dumber. It's we live in a world where anything you want to know can be known, and yet we've actually managed to make ourselves dumber. We're even more stupider than we were previously, and I think a lot of this is because, again, it goes back to the first 24 hours of anything is wrong, right? Because it's immediate. Well, you don't understand the context. You don't really have all the data. You don't have all the facts. It's going to be wrong. You can go back and look at things, during World War II, where it took a week for things to come in. Well, by the time something went to press, you kind of had all the information. It was already there. And so you could accurately transmit the information. Now, did it always accurately get transmitted? No. This kind of goes back to, you were talking about how, once you monetize the news, you corrupt it. I think the news has been corrupted for a very, very long time. You can look at reports of people with Russia, when the communists and the Nazis were on the rise, people in the New York Times were talking about how Stalin's Russia is a worker's paradise. Everyone's happy and fed, and everything's wonderful. And the Nazis are great people who are making the trains run on time, right? It's these. You can find all of these articles, every single one, and people won Pulitzers for them. You can bring it up to Venezuela today, right, where everyone loved. They love what Venezuela was doing. They couldn't talk about, oh, we have money. In fact, it was everywhere. This is nothing new. The question, though, is that there was greater diversity in the past. We've gone through a period of centralization of power. Now we're kind of hitting that point of decentralization, where we can start having broader conversations. We can be like, whoa, 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 whoa. Because again, if even 10 years ago, Biden had made this comment, right? Let's stay on that one comment though. How many people would have actually known about it? Because the news media, the mainstream media, wouldn't have focused on it. But now we do have these competitive sources, and so while for you, right, who you're like, well, he just said something stupid. There are friends of mine who are Black conservatives who are like, no, that is very indicative of the political leanings, and because it is part of a larger narrative that is often overlooked and almost assumed, right? So they get now that platform to be like, hey, I'm here too. You don't get to speak for me. Whereas that ability didn't exist even 10 or 15 years ago. So so there's sort of two things here, right? It's that immediacy is going to bring stupidity because people are going to say stupid things in order to get that bad information. And that's sort of where we're living, right? We live in this age of immediacy, but yet at the same time, there's this counter where as we've decentralized, we get broader conversations because now we can hear from other people as well, right? So it's sort of a double-edged sword. We now can hear those opposing voices. We no longer have to, we're not in 1934, right, reading the New York Times talking about how the workers' paradise is brilliant. Now somebody in Russia can type in something and be like, hey, things suck over here, right? We can start to learn these things. We can hear these things and actually genuinely start having broader conversations. It's no longer controlled as well as it used to be. But
well, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, but I think the problem is, though, at some point we need to break away from this we need to know everything right now mentality, because that's what's driving a lot of these fake news, like you said, these fake news situations where it's just, well, we don't care about the facts. We're just going to give you the part of the story that matters to us.
Well, let's speak about something very specific. So Kayleigh McEnany is the press secretary at the White House. And I think that what's been interesting to watch is that here is, regardless of where anyone's political leanings are, and regardless of the message that she's putting out, that's not what I'm here to present. What I'm here to present is this is a very highly trained, highly educated woman who appears to be very, very smart, very, very engaged. Now, we talked before about there's no accountability. How do you control that? You'll notice a lot of times that the White House press briefings, the questions you get from the field either tend to be the same thing again and again,
right,
or they tend to be kind of simple. And I think it's because a lot of times you'll notice when you see White House reporters in the White House, a lot of them have computers. And it may be because I think they're working on stories and they're looking for quotes to drop in because they want to get that story out. Think about it. In the digital age that we occupy, would you read a story with more credibility if one came out 12 hours ago or one came out 2 hours ago?
Right.
Naturally, you're going to go to the one that's 2 hours ago. So that time frame, that immediacy is pushing that. So what I'm getting at is what I think that the White House has done through their press secretary. Here's an example of how I think I'm seeing an action being utilized. You may have seen that she was putting up figures and she was putting up questions on the screens that they have in the White House press briefing room.
Yeah.
Where it would say questions like, why was General Flynn unmasked by these people? She's like, well, if you're not going to ask them, I'm going to ask them. So now you have a White House press secretary asked not who's there to act as an intermediary between the White House and the press, but now from the White House to the press.
Yes.
because they feel as though that the coverage that they're getting there is not going to be there. Another good example is you could tell by watching the press conferences between the president with the coronavirus task force. They would just go on and on and on in perpetuity, 2 and 3 hour long press briefings. Again, control the news cycle. But the questions that you were getting, you could tell almost the outlet or what their bent was based on the question. Mr. President, 65,000 people are dead and you want to open the country. What's wrong with you? Okay, I'm willing to bet that did not come from Breitbart News. Yeah. Someone else, Mr. President, we want to give you 6 congressional medals of honor because we love your haircut. Probably not CNN. And what I think you saw happen was, as I think the American people, anyone would see, it's not unique to you and me. I think anyone that would see either A, they just saw conflict, B, they just grew tired of it, or even worse, in the age of media broadcast and clicks and likes, they didn't care. And so they changed the channel. At the end of the day, I don't think that this Biden comment is really going to amount to a whole lot of people that it already wouldn't have amounted to. In other words, others that would have reacted to that comment would have already reacted. I think the difference is it's another example of why everything is the biggest story in the history of the world.
Right.
For our literal handful of listeners, Brett Kavanaugh's appointment to the Supreme Court, nomination to the Supreme Court, was the biggest story in the world until it wasn't. Russia was the biggest story in the world until it wasn't. Michael Flynn was the biggest story. Michael Cohen, Stormy Daniels, Michael Avenatti, the coronavirus, the stock market collapsing, unemployment, the election, treaties with China. All of these things were the biggest things that ever happened in the history of the world until they weren't. And I think when you keep an audience on their feet in the infotainment model that we've talked about, one of two things happens. A, you get people addicted. B, you get people that reject it. Or C, in a dangerous place, you get people that get exhausted by it. I've had friends of mine talk to me about just this exhaustion they feel. There's just so much on so many channels, on so many websites that you can't keep it. You can't keep that. You can't run a 7-minute mile for 300 miles.
No, you can't. And you also can't drink from a fire hose, right? No one has ever gotten their thirst quenched by drinking from a fire hose, right? There has to be controlled information. And what I mean by control, is information that is presented in a digestible and understood way. And that can happen in context. So here's the thing, right? We could do this all day. We can compare and contrast how Kavanaugh was treated versus Biden. We can compare and contrast how Ron DeSantis in Florida was treated versus how Andrew Cuomo was treated by the media, right? Ron DeSantis is this terrible dictator who's going to destroy everyone who lives in Florida. And Andrew Cuomo is the greatest person who's ever lived, though Florida seemingly has COVID-19 under control. Well, Andrew Cuomo was shoving sick people into nursing homes, being like, here, are you sneezing and coughing? Go lick some old people. We could do that all day, right? And that would make us no different from Fox or any other of some of these websites. So
for our listeners out there, no one is advocating that you, quote, go lick some old people, end quote. Just want to get that record because the internet is forever. So let's have that there. Okay, good to go.
Yeah, understandable hyperbole for humorous purposes is understandable hyperbole for humorous purposes. Anyway, but the point is, that's humorous. So here's the question, though, right? What do we do with it, right? Okay, so we've spent 2 weeks. We now understand that there is a class of people who make their money off the government and they have influence over the media. We also understand that the media's entire setup now is basically designed to turn us into idiocracy, right? It's just so much information that you never actually get anything properly. It's a narrative that's crafted. It isn't an actual reflection of reality. So designed to give us information so that we can make up our own minds. So we know these things now. It's obvious. You don't even have to argue for it. Everyone sort of sees it. But what do we do about it? Do we just sit here and say, okay, here's the couple of websites or newspapers we think are legit, and y'all need to be listening to them because we are now the people who control all that you see and hear? Or is there a process by which everyone that we would advocate for people to use to make up their own mind? How do we live with this?
Well, again, without making this go too big, I think a lot of things that it's coming down to, and I'm gonna teeter on the side of making this political on a political debate show, but I would say this to our audience out there: I am making my way during quarantine. I'm making my way through The West Wing. Great show, regardless of anyone's perspective on how you look at it. The show definitely presents itself, and the producers of the show, if you know them, Aaron Sorkin and the such, they don't hide where they're coming from politically. It's very easy to see where the show is, but it doesn't take away from the fact that it's a great show and it's very entertaining. It's written well, it's acted well, it's entertaining.
Oh, The West Wing is one of the best shows that has ever been on television. And I don't want to completely derail you, but you've seen those commercials with for that drug thing that has Martin Sheen on it.
I have not. No.
Okay, so there's this company. I guess it's an app that allows you to find like coupons and get discounts on medications and things like that. And it's got the first one has Martin Sheen going on this whole rant about how medication is too high, and people are streaming it live, and everyone's yelling at him to use the app. And finally, he finishes up, and the lady behind the desk hands him, is like, "You could use this and save like 60% or 80%." And he's like, "Oh, why didn't you tell me this before?" She goes, "Well, it just felt like we were having a West Wing moment." And so now they've moved on where he's just running around, waiting for people to buy their stuff. He's like, "Wait, you could save 80% with this," and like you have this. The first group he runs up to is this clearly mother and teenage daughter, and she's like, "Martin Sheen." The daughter's like, "Martin who?" And he does his spiel and runs off, and the mother's like, "Silver Fox," and the daughter turns and looks at her and is like, "Mom!" It is. I'm sorry. The West Wing is the greatest thing outside of Babylon 5, and I'll let you continue. But yes, they were not shy. I would like to say a lot about where he came from.
I would like to state for the record that in 52 minutes and 48 seconds of credibility building on this show, I think we pretty much just let Martin Sheen subvert all of it. So thanks, President Bartlett. No, what I'm saying is this: if we're going to take a giant swing at the pitch, right? This is one of those 30,000-foot strategic views. I think that where we can agree on certain things would be to say this. Again, I'm going to tread softly because there's a lot of landmines in this field. But I would word it from this perspective. I think the general school ground, recess rules would say, and it's ironic that an episode that I was watching the other day of The West Wing kind of addressed this topic. And it said, when one of the characters says, at what point did we surrender being the party that also was strong on jobs and strong on the economy and strong on national defense? And when did we cower away from that? So to personalize it and to contemporize it, make it a little more up to date, I would say this. I think there are a lot of people behind closed doors that would recognize that when it comes to rebuilding the economy of this country, which we will need, more people, if I had to guess, would look at the capability of an executive in that between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, and the polling shows this, that they would pick Donald Trump. Now, what may prevent them publicly from acknowledging that is that they may feel that they absolutely detest Donald Trump at the same time. And I think people are complicated enough that they can respect or recognize someone's ability and still detest them personally. So I would say on the big scale of things, what we're looking at is that you've got people, I think, polling again indicates that they trust Donald Trump to rebuild the economy. And they see the Republicans as this pro-business, open-minded, low taxes, pro-worker environment. The other side that they see, and this was also described in the episode, we're going to owe $1 billion in royalties, is the concept of small versus large government. I think that the concept of, the Trump administration has built itself upon the concept of lowering taxes and deregulation. And I think that they look at, Democrats are your tax and spend Democrats that want to increase the size and power of the federal government. You've seen that through the coronavirus responses. Look at blue state responses, look at red state responses. And I think you're seeing things like that. At the end of the day, when you're behind the curtain, I'm going to say the most boring, milquetoast, blanketed statement that anyone's ever heard of. People vote their wallet. And when they're behind that curtain and they see, just as soon as today, that Vice President Biden's talking about a no tax hike pledge or where his status is going to be with regard to taxes, it doesn't align with any of the programs that they want to fund. So how do you do it? I bring this up to say, watch how these messages are carried through the media, because that will defend and define what we're talking about today. It will go back to that simple point. When you monetize the media, the messaging of those media outlets are no longer critical analysis, but instead you're getting people that are fantastic editorialists. And that's where you get somebody like Rachel Maddow. I think Rachel Maddow, though I don't, and I'll admit this to our audience out there, I don't watch her show. I think she is a spectacular orator. She's a Rhodes Scholar. She's highly, highly intelligent, and she can craft a narrative seamlessly, absolutely seamlessly. She is an incredible, incredible storyteller. Now, unfortunately, the story that her show was telling for 2 years didn't really pan out from a factual basis upon deeper investigation, which brings up the topic of what are fact checkers. Who are fact checkers? To our point about accountability, right? But I bring up the point about Rachel Maddow because I think that there is that factor at the end of the day that a lot of people look at. Rachel Maddow comes across as an intelligent person. Many people said that George Bush didn't come across as intelligent, except for people that knew him, that said that not only was he actually a rather intelligent person, that he had a tremendously natural charisma and people loved to be around him. But that's not how he was presented. To people that evidently know Donald Trump, I could see the recognition of there being a charisma. You can see that he brings out sometimes when he shares that with people, that he's affectionate, he's engaging, whatever it is. I don't know the man. I've never met the president. I've never even been close. But a lot of it comes down to you vote who you like or you vote what they can do for you. The thought to me of someone voting from those realms is very natural, but I think we have to be careful. Because the bigger question is this: for all the people that are coming out charging against Joe Biden, and I'm talking about the left, I'm talking about Bernie Sanders supporters, I'm talking about the left that are coming out calling against him and all these things, do you really think it's going to impact the way they vote? I just don't think it is. I don't think it is at all. Now, maybe they'll stay home the way they did with Hillary. They might stay home and not vote, which could be very impactful. But the point that I'm getting at is, a lot of times, the old saying in public speaking is it's 70% what you look like, 20% how you sound, and 10% what you say.
Oh, absolutely agree.
So I want to wrap on this because I don't want to drag this on. I'm simply saying, you break it down to, excuse me, one party is looked at as the party of jobs. One party is looked at as the party of big government. One party is looked at as having a candidate that knows how to create jobs and had the economy on a tear. The other side is saying, we have a person that can't seem to make it through a sentence. And I do not say this disrespectfully. I say it based off of enumerated evidence and examples that you can see that truly struggles with communicating, whether it's forgetfulness, whether it's just getting facts wrong, or whether it's using language that appears at times almost to be aggressive. And then to say that you look at the two of them and say, well, what's there? Again, I think you're going to vote your wallet. Hopefully you'll vote your conscience, but hopefully you'll vote with the welfare of recognizing that it is more than just a single, well, I don't like their voice, or I don't like their haircut, or I don't like this. that it's rooted in something, in having an understanding. And that really, this is my point to close on, the accountability is with you. It's with the individual. Are you being a knowledgeable member of citizenry? Are you reading up on these people? Are you aware of their policies? I don't ask this question to be flippy. I do ask it to be very direct. And I ask it to you, my esteemed colleague, and to our literal dozen of people listening.
Whoa. Dozen? You're being quite ambitious here.
Oh, no, I didn't say dozens. I literally said dozen.
Oh, no, I said that. Yeah. No, I heard you properly first.
Okay, our half dozen,
Yeah.
our baker's dozen. I'll say this. Now you got me thinking about a baker's dozen.
Okay, so
if that level of accountability for ourselves to be where we are, to understanding what it is that we're voting for, are you truly informed? And here's my question. If the Trump administration's policy is America first, if the Trump administration's policy is strong border security, large military, low taxes, and deregulation, I'm not asking this to be flippy. I'm asking if in the hopes that someone will call in next time. We'll have someone on the show. We'll talk about this because I have a few people that we'd like to bring on the show. What is the Biden campaign's direction? What is their policy on anything? And here's the simple for my public affairs and messaging people out there. What is their message?
I'm not going to be flippant. Yeah, I don't want to be flippant, but I mean, I will be. I think is what we've learned is we need to make friends with Corn Pop. But to your point, I kind of want to go back to one thing that you said, because I think that it ties to something my father taught me, which is, again, the point about knowledgeable citizenry. A lot of this comes, for me, has come back to that Eisenhower speech, several Eisenhower speeches, actually, where we need to have knowledgeable citizenry. But we just spent the last two episodes talking about how we can't even trust the media. How can you be knowledgeable if you can't trust the information you're given? And I think the simple fact of the matter is, you can trust some information, but what you've got to do is get out and look at the different perspectives, right? My father taught me, he's like, look, if you believe anything, that's fine, but you got to show me why, right? Prove to me that this is the right way to look at that. And you can't do that unless you actually have both sides of that story, right? We need to be able to go. We can't just sit there and be like, I'm going to sit here and listen to what Rachel Maddow says, because, like you said, she's maybe a great orator, but she has proven to be lousy as far as actual reality. What we need to do is actually listen to and look at the actual evidence. You can't just be what is the story at the moment. No, it needs to. We have to stop and actually use our long-term memories and be like, what was being said 2 weeks ago? What's being said now? How does this actually work out throughout history? We need to start doing our own research. We need to actually investigate these things ourselves from differing points of view. Otherwise, we're not going to be educated. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to, like I said, you say people vote their wallets. Well, that's great. I think a lot of people do vote their wallets. But I think two people are looking at it differently because they have different historical perspectives, right? I think the kid in college who's like, I'm going to get all my loans paid off if I vote for Joe Biden, and I'm going to get $3,000 a month for doing nothing so I can make art out of dog crap. I mean, it's like, I think that guy who goes and votes for Joe Biden because that is also voting his checkbook, he just has a different historical perspective. What we need to do, and I'm not saying that his historical perspective is less than valid. Yes, I am. But what I'm saying though is we need to raise the conversation by us. We can't rely on Rachel Maddow or Greg Gutfeld or any of these people to raise the conversation. We, as the consumers of the information, have to raise it. We need to be holding people accountable by first knowing. Again, like you said, this goes back to localities. Forget Trump for a second. Forget the senators for a second. Who's your mayor? Who's on your city council, right? Who's your sheriff? Be involved in your local politics, educate yourself about how the national policies are affecting you so that you can affect who gets voted in on the national side. We need to become active both in politics and in our own education, which is something my father did. It's something he showed me. He was, if I may be a little personal here, since we are going into Memorial Day, we lost him. This will be this October will be the second year, uh, and he died very quickly. He literally went, everything looked fine, then gone from a very odd cancer that seemingly some people think is tied to his service in Vietnam. Apparently, they're like, this is not the right kind of cancer. It's supposed to be here, but it's here, and it was hyper aggressive. And but I think about the things that he taught me, and the thing that surprised me the most though was what I learned about him after he passed. Right, he had spent a lot of time working with other veterans to get them medals that other Vietnam veterans, to get them both compensation for things that they needed to have been compensated for injuries received that they weren't being properly taken care of. They were given medal. He was making certain people got medals that they were owed, and I didn't know any of it. He never once talked about it with me. It was something that he and another friend of his who were friends, they actually volunteered to go because they realized that their numbers were going to get pulled. They're like, yeah, we're probably going to get drafted. So why don't we go volunteer? Maybe that'll give us a chance to pick where we go and what we do, which for him it helped because it put him in the motor pool, which is, he was a mechanic. That's where he needed to be. But it also that he ended up in Nam. But the thing that surprised me was he didn't promote what he was doing. Yeah, I found out that there was some, he made it into into some local newspapers here and there, um, because they were, they were covering the person getting the medal, and he was just there. But it's like, why didn't he tell me any of this? And I started asking, I had to ask myself that for like 2 seconds, then I realized it's because it was never about him. Memorial Day for me for the last 2 years, I guess this will technically count as, I'll count this one as their second year, is been allowing me, or has given me the perspective of there's two. We always think about the servicemen who died in battle. We often forget that that far more people die later of diseases that were caught, injuries that were received um, from later on, right? The true toll of any battle historically is not on the day of the battle. It's usually, if you go back to the Middle Ages, you actually had to look at the deaths that happened a week later from infection, 2 weeks later. And even though we've advanced, there's still a lot of people who come home with a lot of health issues and some mental issues. My dad did tell me about a lot of friends that he lost. Because they had been injured, right, and they got addicted to morphine because it was it was the '60s, and that's what they did, right? They just morphed you up and sent you home, and so a lot of people died, and still to this day die of pain related situations. I think their deaths matter too. I think that's something that we need to remember, but then we also, what he reminded me is a lot of the good that happens on small levels. I think this is where it ties together with what we're talking about. We like to look at the big things. Well, the big things are often terrible. The good things are often very, very small, and we don't see them. We don't see the guy who's making certain that someone he's never met got a medal. We don't see the guy who spent 60 hours working at a factory is dropping an extra $100 on groceries for a neighbor who can't afford it. We don't see that. And I think we don't see it because we rely on the national things. We need to become more active on a local level. Your neighbor, how many neighbors can you name, right? I honestly can name four. I can name like 2 houses, and that's it. After that, I'm like, it's that guy over there. That's me. I mean, I'm not saying this to y'all. I'm saying to me as well. We need to become more involved in our world on the small level, and stop pretending like the big things are all that exist. We need to be more active on the local. And I think when you do that, you get to see a lot more good than what our media that likes to clickbait us with it bleeds, it leads. I think Memorial Day is a great time to sort of remember, hey, yeah, go, like you said, go have fun, enjoy, take the time with your family and cherish your family. Take some time to remember that the soldiers who have given their lives for you to do that, you need to honor them. But we also honor them by looking out for those people around us, right? We honor those people by looking out to the least of these, those who are the most vulnerable. And oftentimes, a lot of people who are the most vulnerable are people who've fought for these rights. Sometimes they come home and they're not whole. But we can't forget about them either. Their sacrifice and their harm, their injuries matter. And I think that once we start to focus on the small things, on our local media, our local government, our local neighbors, I think we could start, and as we continue to educate ourselves, I think the big things will change as well. I think the big things change because the small things allow them to change or force them to change. Anyway, that's my rant. I think I'm done with my little rant there.
Well, allow me to take a moment. I had the honor of knowing your father, and I think that your summation of him was something that would make him proud. And I think that because of his natural humility, he would change the subject and celebrate something about you. So I think that you starting this show and getting things going for us to have an open dialogue and to put to work that knowledgeable citizenry is a good thing. I want to make sure that, when we talk to our listeners out there, we're not just some other podcast about let's bash on the media because it's just so easy. I don't think that that's what the direction of this show is about. The direction of this show is about saying, just don't rely on other people to do the work for you. Look into what these things mean and do that research yourself. Understand it. Make yourself aware of what these things are. School boards and tax assessors impact your life a lot more than speakers of the House and senators from a state you don't live in. I think at the end of the day, today, what can really be memorialized is that we have the freedom to do what we're doing right now on this channel, to share our opinions without the fear of the government showing up at the front door, and to be able to share it with one another, whether they agree with us or disagree with us. And that was paid for by the blood of other people. And for that, we will say we never forget.
Agreed. In fact, let me say this. Amen. Amen. We don't forget. We honor those who've gone before and those who've given the sacrifice by carrying the fight on. The fight is not just fought on a battlefield on some distant land. It's fought every day when you fight for the ideals of this country. That's how you honor them. With that, we'll see you next time.
Take care, everybody.